I want to go over a misconception as far as being a remote worker that's full time, that works 9 to 5. I've come across some comments in regards to a couple of videos ago that I had posted that I took it as being smart and mocking me because I work a 9 to 5 job and I am full remote. So I'm going to go over some of the things that apply to me, and I'm sure a lot of these things I'm going to mention apply to you also if you are a remote worker. First thing I want to talk about is we do have set work hours. Just because we're full remote doesn't mean we do not have work hours. Now, I'm salary, so my work hours are from 9 to 5:30, but I start at 8 and normally I take an hour lunch and I'm usually done at 5:30. The latest I have ever worked was about 6 o'clock, maybe 6:30 the latest. Haven't worked any longer than that when I started to work full remote. Now, when I was in the office, I worked a lot of hours because the job that I was doing was different. But now that I'm full remote, I work with a bigger team and we're able to get what we need to get done within those amount of hours, which is great. And I love that. So for number two that I want to talk about is we still have meetings, we still have deadlines, and we are still accountable for our work. Just because we're remote does not mean we don't have meetings, we don't have deadlines to meet, we don't have projects, and you can bet your bottom dollar you have to be accountable because whether you believe it or not, they are watching you, right? They sent an email out a while ago about these mouse jigglers, that software that jiggles the mouse so it makes it look like you're busy. But let me tell you, they have other ways of knowing whether you're working or not. If your screen is idle for a certain amount of time, we use Teams. So after about 5 minutes, you go inactive. And after you go inactive, they can see you're away from your desk or you're doing something else. Like if you take an hour lunch, it's going to show you're away for 60 minutes. Now, if you're gone for almost 2 hours and you only have an hour lunch, then where are you? I mean, they can see that. They can see that you are not working. That's another reason why I think we use Teams and they're not using Zoom anymore because on Teams, you can actually see the status of what you're doing. And we can't change those statuses either because they are set by the administrator of the network. So you can't go in and set when you want to become active or inactive. It just doesn't work that way. So you definitely have to be accountable, right? And I do have meetings. I have meetings at least twice a week. Sometimes depending on if it's training. When I see people say, "Oh, you work full remote," right? Right away, they think you don't work, and you have to work because if you didn't, you would not have a job. I mean, I'm sure they can tap into your computer and they can actually see what you're doing. I'm sure they watch you. On quite a few occasions, I actually seen my mouse cursor move around. So it gave me the indication that they're probably watching. That's fine. I have nothing to hide. So I'm full remote. I mean, they have full access. It's their laptop. They sent it to me when I was hired. So God only knows what type of software they have on there to actually see what you're doing. I'm sure they have keystrokes, and I'm sure they have this, I'm sure they have that. Even though we have Teams, the chats are being monitored and they're actually being saved somewhere on the network, so they can actually go back and see exactly what you're talking about, who you're talking about. I mean, there's actually a disclaimer before I even sign on to the network that your information is being monitored. Like anything, your activity is being monitored. So anything that you're doing, it's being monitored. They're seeing everything, right? I mean, again, it's their laptop. They can change and do and install any kind of software they want, and they can see just about everything that you are doing. I mean, for Pete's sakes, I work for a financial institution, so you can bet your bottom dollar they are checking everything that you are doing to protect themselves. And I'm sure there's a lot of checks and balances in place when you're full remote. Yes, I'm sure there's employees out there that do take advantage of it. There's no doubt. There's definitely, but when I see comments, and I read different articles about everybody going back, into the office full time, that's fine. I mean, the company that I work for, they're actually, if you're a manager or an AVP, you have to go in 4 days a week. I'm not an AVP, I'm not a manager. They asked me to go in a few days a week, and I refused because I was hired full time. I was hired as a full remote employee. So I fought it. I'm like, hey, you know, the two other offices that we have are broken up into, within our department are two each. So we have two in one state and two in another state, and then you have me in Pennsylvania. So even in the office that I go into, there's actually nobody there for me to collaborate with. There's nobody there in loan servicing. So it's pointless for me to go there and just twiddle my thumbs, right? There's other departments that don't even do what we do. So there's no collaboration. There's no in-person meetings when I go in once a month. I know a few people, but they do different things. They don't do the same exact thing that I do, right? And there's no way of connecting or collaborating. I mean, you can just go in and say, "Hi, how are you?" And that's it. It's basically what you do. Maybe chit chat every now and then about the Eagles. By the way, go Birds. Talk about sports, talk about this, talk about family, talk about kids. That's it. And you go home, right? I mean, that's where we are right now. That's where we are in today's world. And I get a lot of people have to go back in. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I mean, if my calling is, hey, you got to go in, a few days a week, then so be it, right? But I'm going to keep trying to fight it because, again, I was hired full remote, so I'm going to stand by it because I had mentioned in the beginning, and you can negotiate this. I said, I don't want to be hired unless it's a full remote position, right? And they hired me on that basis, right? And my contract that I signed says my office, my location that I report to is in a different state. It's not in Pennsylvania, right? I mean, yes, granted, they can change that if they really want to, right? Or they can just get rid of me if they really want to. But I stood by my grounds. I said, hey, this is the information that I signed. And, you know, the contract says I report to this office, not to this office, right? And I got that email, like a year ago, them to report 3 days a week into the office. But it's up to my manager. My managers decide, hey, I know you work hard, you're full remote, and there's no issues with what you do. You get what you have to get done within the hours and you're accountable. Remember, I mentioned that earlier. Being accountable when you're remote is extremely important. Now, the big difference is being full remote versus being in office as flexibility. I have a lot of flexibility, right? As long as I get my work done, I am salary, right? I'm not a 9 to 5 employee that gets paid hourly. So I'm salary. I get paid a set amount of money for the year to do my job. And I do extra, above and beyond. You should always go above and beyond, right? And if I didn't, I probably would not still be at the company. I still wouldn't be at the company, I should say, that I am right now if I didn't do that, right? So everybody who says, oh, when there's massive layoffs, you're the first to go, you're full remote. Not true. There's people that have been going in for years, unfortunately, and they were cut. They were part of the layoff. So it's just to show you that just because you're remote does not make you any different than the person that's going in the office, right? I mean, maybe there's a chance that they'll get promoted before you because they're in office versus somebody who's not in office. But hey, my manager is, remote and she manages me. So, that's just to show you that it could, it's possible. It is possible to be a manager or an assistant vice president or anything like that at any company, even if you're full remote. Now, I did hear stories about companies, you know, saying that, before COVID, I heard people have to sign contracts saying that if they were full remote, that they would bypass the option to ever getting a promotion. You would get raises, but you would never be promoted. You would never move in the spot that you're in. Like if you did loan documentation, you would never move away from that position. The only way you would move from it is if you applied for a different position or you left. But you would never be a loan documentation manager. You'd never be a loan documentation vice president. You would never move up. It actually happened at the last company I worked with. A lot of people wanted to move that transition over to being full remote, and then they tell everybody how to commit back in 4 days a week, and that if you were full remote, there was exceptions, right? And I tried to make the exception, and they wouldn't let me, so I decided to part ways. And that was my choice. It is not because I didn't want to go in. The office moved to a different location. I didn't like the location. It was in the middle of nowhere. You had to get in your car and drive if you wanted to grab lunch. Where I worked before was in a city area. It was like a well-populated area. You were able to walk up and down the strip after work, go down happy hour, have a couple of beers, watch a band play. But where they moved the office location really sucked, right? So I didn't agree with it. So I'm like, hey, I want to be full remote. Can we make this work? They said no. I, did my research, found what I wanted, and that's what I got. So, it's rough hearing and seeing others say, you know, that you don't work because you're full remote. It's not true, right? I wouldn't have a job if that was the case, right? And even when I leave for like, baseball games or baseball practices or have a doctor's appointment, I always let them know. I'm like, hey, I got to leave a little bit earlier, but I might start at 7 instead of 8, where I might not take a lunch, right? Because again, I'm that type of employee who's not going to buck the system. I won't buck the system in that way where I'm like, you know, I come in at like 9:30, 10 o'clock, I take an hour lunch and I leave at 5:30. No, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I'm salary. People do it and they do abuse it. So it's just a matter of how you feel consciously what is the right decision. And I always think of myself, in my head, I always think like I'm the business owner. I know I'm not the business owner, but I was told years ago to always work like you own the business, even if you don't own it. Put yourself in that mindset. Put yourself in the mindset that you own the business. What would you do in that situation? And that's how I always think. That's how I think about things. If I was the boss, somebody came to me and said that, how would I handle that? I handle it that way. It's called being accountable, respectful, and doing what you have to do, right? And it's being courteous, right? So, you know, again, remote workers do work. I'm not saying that everybody does, but I'm a remote worker that actually works. And last but not least, last thing I'm going to talk about is the workload. The workload does not disappear. Just because you're remote doesn't mean you do it the next day. There's a set of tasks I have to do daily that need to be done in a specific time frame. And remember I said earlier in this video, deadlines? I have deadlines. I have reports that have to be delivered to our clients' inboxes by 11 a.m. Then I have other reports that need to be sent out by the end of the day before like 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. So there's a lot you have to get done. Wires have to be sent out the door. You have to approve wires. There's a lot involved. And that's just with my job, right? So even if there's other remote workers that are out there, they're going to have to do the same exact thing. They're going to be held accountable for what they were hired to do. So even when you tell people you're a full remote employee, they're like, "Oh, you're remote." Like, "Oh, okay, you're remote. That's cool." Because I got to go in every day. And I get it, right? I understand that. I understand we're frowned upon. Us remote workers are frowned upon, and hey, you know what? It is what it is. But I built my empire. I'm self made. I looked for what I wanted and I got what I wanted. So I just wanted to talk to you about this because I've seen some comments come across on some of the other videos that I remote, about being remote, and that they clicked off the video after I said I work a 9 to 5 job, not full remote. So I wanted to debunk it and just go over what I wanted to talk about with you, just so everybody has an understanding that not all remote workers don't work. That's where I'm going to leave this video. I'll catch you in the next video.